might then, at that point, assess them, and at that point, then after have a collaborative discussion. So what I'm trying to sort of demonstrate here is actually it's the sequence of activities which is learning design. So even the same simple activities, irrelevant of what the content is, ordered in a different way, have a dramatic impact on terms of the student learning experience. And that's the basis, the very simple basis of learning design. It's much more complex in a sense where you think about the different environments and different spaces. But one of the things I want to try and explain and show you the power of this principle is that with any one of these sequences, as long as you swap things with similar colours, let's move that across here, maybe the lecture here could be swapped to a flipped recorded lecture. Maybe the reading list here could be a web resource. As long as you keep the colour of the type of activity, you can keep the same pedagogical model but blend between online and offline and keeping and ensuring the validity of the kind of educational processes that you use. So it allows you to take the concepts of a face-to-face or an online course and morph them in different ways using different blended mixes depending on what resources, spaces and times that you have, whilst ensuring the pattern works. And the other interesting thing really as well is once you know you've got a pattern, so especially if you've got an inquiry-based learning approach where you're starting with a trigger activity, you're engaging them in conversation, you're asking them to produce a resource and then you're assessing them in a more formal way. Once you've got that logic sorted out, you can apply that to different topic areas. Because this is independent of content at some level. The design can be applied and contextualised. And then for each of these individual activities, then there's the theory, which is instructional design, of how you take one of these activities and you write the resources and the student activity descriptions around each of these icon types. So that's where sort of curriculum design informs learning design, which is a sequence of activities, spaces and times, into instructional design, which is where you actually look at the individual activities and how they're constructed, what resources they use and what media they use most appropriately to deliver the activity. Now, this kind of framework is a bit of a jump in some ways, and it's got there's lots and lots of literature about the utility of learning designs independent of content and how they can be reused and researched independently. And they're a great way of sharing ideas that can be extracted from different subject areas and used in new contexts. But it's also a way of being really creative and imaginative and thinking about new ways of teaching when you're sometimes a bit stuck and you're doing things the same way. How can I mix it up? So we can have a bit of an experiment just to test me, I think, and yourselves. Hopefully there should be some sort of pots around the job and hand these out, just hand them to different levels. And we're going to have a bit of an experiment. So in each pot there's a different colour of activity type. And I would like you, if each of you with a different pot can have a rustle around and read out 3 different examples. I'll start with a different colour, and then I want you to...
Sorry, could you do that?
So if you can hand them round, yeah, just make sure each person, there's a pot with a different person. Each of you have a rustle around, okay? And those with pots, can you find 3 different examples that you like? And then in a minute we'll get you to call out some examples and then we'll pick one. And who's got brown? Which sort of area of the room's got the brown ones at the back there? Okay. Peter, do you want to give us some examples you've got there?
I've got comic strip.
Okay.
Audio podcast.
Yeah.
And knowledge concept maps.
Okay, they're 3 really interesting examples. So do you want to pick one that we can use?
Comic strip.
Right, John, do you want to grab the comic strip? Okay. Okay, so you want to read out 3?
I've got case study, simulation and games, field work placement.
Oh, okay. They're really interesting. Do you want to pick one?
Simulation and games.
Oh, okay. This is going to be tricky. Okay, that's John. All right. So who's got the yellow one? The communicative, collaborative.
So we have communities of learning, discussion forum, and video conference.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Do you want to pick one?
A video conference.
Yeah, the intense, expensive course. Okay.
No one's being nice to you though.
Okay. So what the course student's going to produce, let's have a look at the blue.
So I have a student presentation, e-portfolio and assignment.
Okay. I just suddenly realised I was supposed to be saying what you were saying. I was going to capture on camera with it.
So I'll be nice and give you student presentation.
Oh, okay, student presentation. All right, you can hand that over.
Less expensive.
So who's got assessment? Who's got the pink ones? In the middle there. Do you want to read out 3 examples?
Formative question and answers, direct feedback, open learner model.
Oh, okay. There's some complex ones. Okay, so direct feedback is a way of providing, that's the one that you can tag to any kind of activity. It's a way of presenting feedback to anything that students engage with, so it could be a forum or others. Open learning model is a complex way of providing direct feedback to interactions of students online in terms of demonstrating their understanding of their competencies in other areas. And the last one?
Formative question and answers.
Okay, should we go for that one? Just as the others go. Thanks, John. So when you're thinking about the design, you also have a number of tools up your sleeve, which include the idea that you can release things on various different times, and you can also have selective release or actually allow them to move on to different activities depending whether they've completed or not completed different types of activities, and they all can also be used for differentiation depending on the level at which they achieve things. So let's start with something I know that would work quite interestingly. So a comic strip, that if you can see that there, a comic strip is a really useful way of presenting the context of, say, a patient situation, enabling and presenting a story, a situation that you might want to sort of suspend students' disbelief and set up a situation and present a patient's perspective, their presentation at an A&E clinic or something like that. You might use that as an initial kind of presentation. I think probably you then, with a student group, you might consider arranging a video conference to talk about that comic strip and get students maybe to work in different groups, one to take on each of the different roles. Maybe if you took it into professional educational role, you could have a video conference of the different roles being in and sharing their experiences. Or you could just look at the different aspects, ethics, the clinical safety. You could pull up a range of different topics that groups could have a video conference about. Okay. You could then possibly, once you've set them up in that way, you could probably then put them in a situation or a simulation, maybe using a virtual patient, which actually takes that clinical situation on further and interact where students choose their actions with that patient, who they refer to on them, what tests they do, and interactively experiment, if you will, with the patient and see what the best practices are with that student. It might be a procedure, it might be a clinical decision making, or it might be a range of other factors that you're exploring that case once they're engaging in that. And within that, the whole point of the green ones is that there's implicit feedback in those kind of activities, because if you kill the patient, you kill the patient. Okay. So based on that, what you might actually then do is ask students to reflect upon all of their activities and actually produce a student presentation on maybe the trajectory, the patient life cycle from their presentation to hopefully a positive outcome, and present about the things that they've learned in terms of their underpinning basic science knowledge about patient safety or other aspects that you're then talking about. And you might then wrap that up after the student presentations with a sort of a general question and answer session, which could expand and relate the topics to other areas and modules, or pick out aspects with the students that they weren't too sure on, and look at the variety and different approaches taken by the different student groups. So that's just an example of the way you can take a few simple activities, think about a concept, and use these kind of activities to plan your learning. Now, there's actually a booklet available online which actually presents all these icons in a little booklet, each with a little description against them of type of activities, as you can see here. And this can be used, and there's also one that you can print out and make little cards of your own, and they can be used to help you design a course or a series of learning activities, whether offline or completely face-to-face. And the idea is that you can move the blended learningness from online to offline by just picking activities in the colour which relate to the type of activity. Okay, how long have we got? A couple of minutes? Okay. mean, as I say, you can, that's where you can do, you could line up these different examples here in the sense that rather than, say, presenting a lecture, you could actually present key content through a variety of stories presented in comics. And it just shows you these kind of examples, the way that you can vary the type of course. The other thing that the colours do, which is quite important really, is if you remember I should have taken a screenshot, if you remember the presentation at the beginning, the layout of them, it was all quite brown. So by looking at the mix of colours, it can help you to identify the nature and type of course. So is it a little bit dull? Is it too much information? But all of that is entirely appropriate depending on what level they're at and where the course is situated in the other modules. Okay, so I'll answer any questions or thoughts. I mean, how does that inform your view of what learning design is and how that might be useful? Does that appeal? Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Where did you get the book from?
Online, you can download it online because I produced this a couple of years ago.
Oh, you
Yeah.
produced it.
For teaching. It's one of this whole sequencing thing I find in education courses is one of the things that is implicit in what you do, but it's very poorly made explicit in the teaching of activities.
Pete, could you just explain you need to repeat the question, but the DIBBLE, the process of DIBBLE, and maybe what that was, and if people really sort of come across it?
Yes, sure. So the process of DIBBLE is an experiment that myself and two other colleagues from around the university put together this workshop, 2-3 day workshop where colleagues came together to explore the idea of inquiry-based learning, and particularly looking at how inquiry-based learning could be facilitated using a blended learning approach where they can have electronic resources and look at different modes and mediums of communication, and then look at the different kind of production and assessment vehicles that students could then use. So these learning design icons were used as part of a range of tools to help facilitate that thinking process, where we actually got people with similar subject interests to come together and explore an inquiry-based learning activity and use these to help sequence them. We then also provided a whole sort of planning worksheet which provided a pedagogical structure to thinking about what do you need to think about when you have a discussion. What's the teacher presence within that scenario? What's the social presence? What's the what are the things you need to think about in planning an activity? And we had a whole structured like PBL scenario. So it was very much staff engaging in PBL learning activities as if they were students in order to develop learning materials. And it's something in time will run within this college, but we contextualise to the different programmes. And is also something we can run on a programme basis as well. Anybody else?
How much evidence is there for the efficacy of these different modes of learning and teaching? And obviously different students learn in different ways,
Right.
and they're not all going to be suited to all of these. In a small group scenario, how do you pitch it appropriately for a diverse set of students, or do you just hope?
Okay, well the question in terms of the efficacy of the different learning activities, practically every single one of these icons is an hour's lecture I could give you on the utility and evidence base in terms of the teaching aspects of these kinds of activities. So as you said, small group teaching activities is one type of way of engaging students in, and with small group teaching there's a huge volume of literature that looks at the efficacy of small group teaching and the variety of numbers and the ways that you can change the dynamic in terms of having different roles, different students who are facilitators, activities where they're led by a teaching assistant versus electives, all sorts of ways you can have a resource-based or around a video as a concept for discussion. So it really depends what you're trying to achieve. I think that's the key message with all of these. As you said, in terms of learners are very different. The learning objectives you have means you choose the learning activities given your resources that are most appropriate to meet those needs, and you use your expertise to refine them. So you could ask the same question of any of these learning activities: how useful and how appropriate are they, and are they the best use of time, which is in a sense efficacy. Any other questions?
Great. Good.
All right.
Some of this. It's not quite as eclectic and imaginative as all the options that Peter's shown, but there's still a lot that can still be achieved through Canvas. So what I've been doing over the last week or so is kind of looking at 4 different scenarios and looking to see how we can use Canvas effectively to design certain activities that are realistic to our students. I'll just put them in here. I want this again. Let me try some here. Okay. This might work better. Right. Okay, so I can give access to people actually later as well, if people want to come in here later and just sort of see how it works, because I may have to sort of go reasonably quickly through some of these examples. So I've picked out 4 here. So we've got PBL, problem-based learning. We've got inverted classroom, independent learning, and an enhanced or blended classroom. And I've got a couple of different sort of types of scenarios using the Canvas tools in each of these. So the first one is an example taken from our graduate entry course in the MSCHB, and it's simply a problem that is given to students, and they get this on a sort of at the start of the week. They're in a group, they have to look at the scenario, work together. They can use the discussion board, and then a scribe will summarise some of the findings for then a meeting with an expert at the end of the week, and then all of that is written up. So what I've done here is, and this is a pretty simple example to start with of using something like the kind of the WebCT style approach. So we've simply sort of used one of the pages to show the information, the problem. We could have used a Word document, but I've just put it in here with an image. It looks slightly more attractive. And at the bottom of the page we have links through to a discussion thread here. So we have the discussion thread, and this is now available to the students. And it's limited just for the students who are in a particular group. So we can sort of tailor that in that way. And similarly, another advantage of Canvas is that through here we have the opportunity of using the Open Wiki solution that's available, in which, as a student, for our students, we can open up a page of this nature and make it editable for any of the students as well as the staff. So this is a place where they can come together in their groups and start to document their findings, making the work of the scribe much easier, which I'm sure they'll be thrilled about. So that's kind of as simple as it gets, really, in terms of this approach. And as you can start to see, you can link the tools together. A slightly more detailed approach is using the group facility of Canvas. And in Canvas, what you can do, it's a bit of the way of getting around the fact that selective release isn't quite as sophisticated as in WebCT, which is one of the major things we found that doesn't quite compare. But in the group facility, what you can do is say, right, we can set up a group for these different people. They can have access to a relatively closed space in which they have relatively open access to lots of the different features. And so they can take control of this space. And so what I've done here is, again, just presented the case, but provided the links through to the discussion in here. So we've got the discussion for the group, but also the community space. So again, quite simple, but it's a way of just constraining the access in this space for just the people you want to have access. So PBL, in a sort of group area, there's all sorts of different things we can add in. And as I go through the different scenarios, you can see that actually you could be adding other tools in here. But I was trying to just sort of show how you go from set a problem, have a discussion, summarize your findings, and then come back later. Okay, going into an inverted classroom. These are the same philosophy as a flipped classroom, just a different name. And the idea of this is presenting material up front, allowing students to access that in advance, digesting that information, then having a more intensive opportunity of discussion in a setting such as this, and then being able to take that back into their learning later. So in this case, is a way of just trying to sort of present material in a sort of semi-meaningful way on a single page. Forgive me for this embed here. This is kind of, it's not as neat as it would be if we were using Panopto or Echo in its way that it will be available. But I've kind of just put in an iframe that just shows you the link to the session that would be publicised from Echo. So what we're using here is a series of different elements of Canvas. So obviously this is the page. We've got a link to a quiz. We've got the discussion link to. We'll have a calendar entry. Because this is the point I didn't make actually in the PBL session. Because you've got the calendar that can alert students to different activities, for certain materials you can have time-bound kind of alerts. And an inverted classroom would be one in which you want to say, students, right, now is the opportunity, go in, look at this resource, it's just been published, and prepare for the lecture. And the announcement can be done in exactly the same way to that cohort of students, but the calendar is slightly more sort of ability to store the information on your own devices and have the notification going to you when it's appropriate. The external media as well, this is, it looks a bit hammy, I must admit at the moment, but the principle is such, and I'll show you other examples, in the ability to just embed material quite effectively into the sequence of the page. And you've got text up here which you can just sort of flag. I've also got some library resources down here. So these are you've seen this before, there's sort of, this would go to a wiki page, this would go to a quiz, and then we've got the further reading. And this is a link to find it. We've previously been able to link to sort of journal articles and things, but now through Canvas there is, up here, this link to find it, which most of you are aware of, which is the searchable library catalogue, which is available for all of our university staff and students. So what we can do is start to sort of identify resources in that, and rather than fall foul of CLA issues, we can just provide deep links into there, and in this case it's hopefully going to work, and it will go to the book reference. And similarly in here we can link through to, I couldn't find many articles, so we've got an adult rat. But pretty useful. So in terms of what we're doing here, we're trying to just not reproduce all of those Word documents and things we've ripped off and scanned in, but just provide the deep links that are already available to us quite freely and easily. And then these are just simple external links to other sites. So don't reinvent the wheel, use the material that's already out there. We've got a whole host of things already in WebCT, but the stuff being created all the time through open education resources, through other universities, through other institutions. So let's make best use of that. So the principle of this is simply that let's use this sort of format. The page is as a wiki. You can just associate lots of material, point your students to it and prompt them to go and access it, and then you can have your lecture. I'll come back into kind of what you might do in a sort of in the lecture in terms of other resources in Canvas in a second. Let me get back to the science page. Okay, in terms of independent learning, this is kind of the thing that I guess we're probably more associated WebCT with. It's just a case of putting the materials on and letting students just access that, maybe have a little bit of a formative assessment exercise. So in here, let's have a look in here. So we've got an independent learning example, and what I've done is pulled off some open educational resource that's got all of the attributions associated with it. So I've pulled that into here, got the right referencing, we can link to other materials, and I've also pulled in a couple of other resources which are shown in here. Again, these are just, it's simple just to be able to embed resources through. This is SlideShare, this is YouTube, and display it on the page with your quiz, and then the quiz will open up in a new page like this. Okay, so there is the ability to put these things in a sequence pretty well, and it's sort of, hopefully by the end you'll see, well actually we can make this a little bit more effective. The other way of doing this then is as a module, and here we've got an independent learning activity. Now the modules are available down the left-hand side, and I'll show you it in more depth in a second. But the module I see as being actually a learning activity. So the term module is kind of a little bit of a misnomer, but it can also be used to group things like modules or weeks of activities. But if you use it in this sense, and what I've done is simply link to the first element of a series of files in a module, you get these sort of very handy little page turning tabs. So you might associate more to the kind of learning activities you'd have in a CPD module. And this gives you the simple page turners. And what it's doing at the moment is going through a series of pages with the kind of content I've just shown you, but in a sequence that we can control. And what you can do in the module as well, you can force students that they have to go through these in the defined manner. So we've done that in Storyline, if people are familiar with Articulate Storyline, but you can also do it here in Canvas. You can embed a wide variety of materials. Again, the size is funny. This seems to be a Firefox issue. I've shown you pages. We can do, in this case, a quiz. So we've got the quiz embedded here. I've happened to have taken this one already. And we've got this one. Oh, here we have, oh sorry, this was jumping onto the next module. Forgive me. And this is something I've actually gone back to Canvas and said, actually, we do need a few more controls around this, because what you get down here for everyone is this link here, which shows you how I've constructed this independent learning activity. So we've got a series of pages I've created, and I've just dropped them in here, and it automatically gives you those next and previous buttons. And if I just show you here, in terms of what content can be added, these are all the different things you can add in that sequence. So we've got quiz, I've shown you a file, can just be a file, I'll show you that in a second. A content page is on wiki pages, discussion board. Headers are little separators in these lists, if you're going to direct students to the lists as they are. And obviously external URL and tool. And tool at the moment, we have a couple of options, but we probably will have Panopto or Echo 360, maybe other ones as well. So you can also add in other things as well into here. And they assemble themselves very quickly and easily into this. I'll show you in a second how, in another example, you can come into this module and create something more useful for the students to see. Okay, so let me just go back to my learning design. What's that? Okay. Where was there? As a module? As a quiz, okay. Again, this could be, I've tried, actually this one wasn't terribly successful, I have to admit. What I tried to do is take that content and add that into the header of the quiz, and then have the quiz elements beneath it. What it seems to do, even though I added a big chunk of text in the top, it was still just giving me my question in here, so it needs a bit more experimentation. I'm not sure quite why it's doing that. But that would be another alternative. You have a learning activity, independent learning activity, bit of a sort of a background information, and then you have the quiz elements. Not too sophisticated, but still a possibility. Okay, finally in terms of this, just very quick sort of demonstration, an enhanced or blended classroom. And in this, it kind of could be what you're doing in your flipped classroom when you actually come together after viewing the materials online. Or it could just be in a standard lecture anyway, but trying to sort of make the most of what Canvas can offer. So the obvious way is an enhanced classroom needn't be a face-to-face class as this. And one of the tools in Canvas is Big Blue Button, it's called, which is like Illuminate and Collaborate, one of these webinar softwares. And through the conference option down the left-hand side, which is grayed out, you can call a new instance of this to make it available to your students at any time. And I've just put a link in here which didn't start the session. I was going to be clever then and start the session, it didn't work. If we go to session conferences, oh, it's already happened. Let's start a new one. You get the idea. So the ability here is, so you can do it as quickly as that. You can start a session up in which you can invite your students to come in. You do need a microphone, obviously. Oh dear. Jesus, Mary Jane Crossings. No. Sorry. That's better. Sorry about that. Right, so you can invite people in, probably not in live situations. Need some work, need to speak to Martin Jones. But you can import into this space your PowerPoint presentation, and through this space you've got a chat option down this side, and you can just be going through it, and students can be putting their hands up, they can be communicating with you. So there's an obvious opportunity there for, if you don't want to have the session here, if you want to have other people coming in, it could be again, get problems, it could be an IP session, it could be some CPD, it could be a postgraduate training course where we do have distance learning modules now, and so something of this nature would be perfect. Okay, we'll go back. So just two more examples. Synchronous chat. Now this might horrify a few people in the audience, but it is something we're seeing in lots of sessions. Marcus is probably tweeting away as we speak. But also in Canvas, we have the ability now, you don't see it down the left-hand side, it was released just on Saturday, a new instance of a chat tool in Canvas. It appeared yesterday because I asked for it, and it's disappeared again today, sadly. But I've got a screenshot up here which looks very similar to the other tools in Canvas. So you've got the people chatting down here and then the thread of the conversation. And the way that can be used, obviously, in the lecture is that people, because this is completely mobile-friendly Canvas, it can sit on an iPad as it is, or it can sit as an app. And people could be just chatting away, and you could be seeing this on the screen. Challenging, I admit, for some lecture situations, but certainly possible. Same is true with Twitter. Again, we see this in conferences, and the ability to have the tweets going on in the background. You might come to them at the end of the session. Just seeing if Marcus has actually posted any here. But this is kind of live. What Marcus is doing, we're seeing the actual thread here that's embedded into this page. And it's a very quick and easy process just to embed something of that onto your page. It could be a search of things, it could be a hashtag that you've given to your students and said, now comment on this. So there's very quick and easy ways to embed it. And because you could do it just with Twitter anyway, .com. But by embedding it, the students can then see that thread later if they come back to it. Okay. Last example is as a module. And what I've done in here is, so the blended or enhanced class could be using this. It's sort of like the flipped classroom example, and it's presented it in one place. So here we have the ability, through the sequences of a module, to present the material. And what I've done in here is, if we look at the module, we can direct the students directly to this group here. So this could be week 1, session 1, and then you put in the materials. So what we have is the presentation, and then these are the little headers that I referred to earlier, and then we've got a formative assessment, discussion activity, and then a learning activity. So simply you can sequence these activities through something that could be a flipped classroom, a blended classroom as I've alluded to, and it could be something that students could step out into during the session through their devices and just be able to do it. So obviously we have Turning Point, but you can do it in here. The way we're looking to, if we go into it, is using, because it's in the module, we have these tabs. So we have the ability just to sort of structure the activity in here, and students can go through the quiz and get the feedback as it shows here. and then move on to the discussion. That's terrible. Obviously, you can create your own discussion using a podcast, which would record what you're saying, and then the students can follow what you're saying, and maybe you're asking a question. And this is just a link out into what could be a learning activity in the resource, or it could be just a web resource that you can point to. Okay, so there we have a very quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we can do in Canvas. It would benefit probably from having a far more sort of detailed look at exactly what we're doing here. And this is what we're going to be doing through the summer with a series of program expert teams, is looking at things that are already happening in WebCT, looking to see how we can assemble content in Canvas, but then also looking at some of these things that are already happening in the classroom, online, as independent learning, and looking to see how we can best associate the best tools in Canvas with what's going on already in the classrooms, and maybe finding some new solutions to existing problems. Pete?
One thing I'd say is the reason why, hopefully you can see the link between what I was saying before in terms of learning design, but if you actually plan in advance of approaching Canvas, the kind of activities you want to achieve and the order you want to place them, then when you go to use a tool like Canvas, it's even a little less scary, because you know exactly what you want to put in what order and what you're trying to achieve, rather than going after thinking, I'll figure that out until I get something nearly what I want to do. But if you have a plan and you know what you're trying to do and how it relates to your learning objectives, then you can actually pick out the tools and work out the ones you actually need to use.
I should add as well that CLAD, and Debbie's here from CLAD, Debbie Carter, are looking to produce some exemplar courses. Is that correct, Debbie? Debbie is nodding for the recording. And the idea is that some staff from each of the colleges would be working with the CLAD team, maybe with the student assistant, to create things, more sort of structured examples of this kind of nature to demonstrate to people and show what can be done through Canvas. This is just a very sort of simplistic view of some of the tools and how they can be applied, but that hopefully will be very useful in it. And that will be available later in the summer, is that correct? That is correct. Okay, thank you. Okay, so has anybody got any questions about that? I do apologise for being super quick. Anything you've seen there that would be problematic or could be very useful to what you do? Any other learning design that you think you currently do that hasn't been shown here that we need to be thinking about?
Can you embed storyline in there?
You can, I think, pretty confident. Dan and Pete are sitting behind you.
You can. There is an issue in terms of sharing the data between the instances and
Yeah.
the system, which I'm trying to work out ways around at the moment.
Yeah, previously Pete was just saying there's issues in terms of storing the data. Previously in WebCT you can import it as a SCORM package, and that allows you to either record through the grade book or the student details, either the tracking data or the responses to the formative assessments. At the moment Canvas isn't SCORM supported, so we don't have that facility, but you can still embed a learning activity as an articulate storyline or something similar. As one of those, yeah. Okay, so if there's no other questions, my last point was just to flag next Wednesday's session, which is an open mic session. So maybe you've been to sort of one of these comedy stores and you've seen it. Well, this is kind of not as funny, but it hopefully could be quite interesting, and it's the ability for people just to stand up and just say for a minute or two something that they're interested in or something that they're doing, or maybe something they'd like to find out more or just sort of plug. So if you've got any ideas, please let me know. You could turn up on the day and just come and present something. I can't guarantee if we've got enough people in advance that it's going to be there, so it may not be quite as open. But please, if you've got any ideas, let me know, and we'll entertain anything that you suggest. Okay, thanks very much for coming today.